Hello and welcome to another sizzling episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. I'm talking about a book today, and normally I would have a book to show you, a physical item. I don't have that because I only have a digital copy of this book, and it is a challenging, it's an incredible and illuminating and wonderful read. I really enjoyed reading it. Well, I say I enjoyed the entire experience, but there were moments during the time I read it where I was pretty depressed because it's very hard hitting. It's called Power Metal. It's by an amazing writer called Vince Beiser. He's based in Canada, but he's clearly traveled. He's a very well traveled man. He's been all over the world. He's seen firsthand what we do as the human race to ensure the supply of the materials we need to make the things that we all rely on. And I think it's one of those. It's been a long-term bugbear of mine that we just accept things. I do this from experience because for decades, for instance, I would buy petrol or diesel for my cars, and I just didn't think about where it came from, didn't think about where it went after I'd burnt it, did not think about it for a long time and then once you start thinking about it, it's really annoying. Then you've got to think about it. Oh God, now I've got to be aware of that. Same with meat. Where does meat come from? I kind of always knew where meat came from because I did work on farms when I was a kid. So I've always been one step ahead in the world of meat. But not with anything else. Where does your frying pan come from? What's it made from? What about your cooker? What about your shoes? What about your undies? They've all come from somewhere. That's all been made by someone somewhere, and it's been moved around somehow on something until it arrived at the shop where you bought it. That's or online when it's delivered to you. Those things are kind of partly deliberately obfuscated by manufacturers, by mining companies, by oil and gas companies. They don't want us to think about it because then we might start worrying about it and not want to buy it. And what Vince has done in this book is just peel back all the layers, go, this is where the materials come from that are in your cell phone, your laptop, your lights, your car, your e-bike, your everything, your routers, the copper wires in your house. Where does that copper come from? We're all completely and utterly culpable. We're all involved. There's no one I've ever known in my life. I'm just trying to think of the most mad hippies that lived on the land and lived in teepees. They had metal pans and cups and knives and forks still. They didn't mind that or melt it down and make the iron tools themselves. I'm just trying to think of really extreme examples of human beings who've tried to shed the guilt of living in the modern world, and they failed miserably, all of them, including me. So it is a fascinating book. It does not pull its punches. It is very, very, slap you in the face with a cold fish wake up call for all of us to know where the things we use come from. But there is a kind of optimistic element to it because what we're looking at now is more and more the mining we are doing in the future, and we will do increasingly in the future, is we're mining the materials we've already mined. We're recycling everything. That too has enormous challenges, but it is better still, no matter what, to recycle a load of material that we've already used rather than dig up some fresh stuff. And that's really where we've got to get to. And that's what Vince's book is really about. And I'm very grateful that I came across it and got the chance to talk to him. He's a really lovely man. And so that's all I'm going to say now, because we explain more of it in this podcast. So please welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast, Vince Beiser, talking about Power Metal. This episode of the Fully Charged podcast is brought to you by OVO's Charge Anywhere. Charge Anywhere helps you power your car wherever you are, plan your route, and pay. You'll have access to over 34,000 chargers across the UK's largest charging networks and more than 400,000 chargers across Europe.
Setup is easy. Just download the OVO Charge app, create your account, add payment details, hit the road, and start charging. There's no need to be an OVO customer either. Simply pay as you go or benefit from up to 15% off your charging with monthly boost packages. OVO's Charge Anywhere. Power your next journey with peace of mind.
So, Vince, two things that have happened with this. Sometimes you get sent a book, which never used to happen in my previous life. But now I get sent books, or I know people who've written books and I read their books, or I sometimes buy books, even that radical.
Shocking.
And they're not, and I kind of know what it's basically about. And I know, and that's exactly, I felt, I know about this. I know all about metals and mining and refining and transportation. And every time I turned a page in your book, I went, I didn't know that. It's been a real, proper, steep learning curve. Because I'm kind of,
That's very high praise.
yeah, no, I'm serious. I'm really impressed with it. It's called Power Metal, and I love that, the race to get. I mean, it's so. I knew it was a big topic, but you've expanded it way beyond anything I could imagine because it's just huge. But I think you've got. I think you've got the balance right. As in, this is a massive problem, but also we've got to do something. I think that's my baseline is what we do now okay, which is extracting fossil fuels, transporting them, refining them, burning them once, and pretending nothing else matters.
Right.
Kind of feel we're on the same page on that particular score, that we might need to do something a bit different.
Yes, I would say so. That is the understatement of the year, I would say.
But can you just give the listeners and viewers a bit of background of how you got into the topic? Because I would classify you as a proper journalist, someone who does research.
Well, that's a flattering way to put it, I guess. Yeah, I'm a full-time freelance journalist, and really, what got me going was about 7 or 8 years ago. By now, I got my first electric car because, like so many people, I was still concerned about climate change, and really felt like, we've got to get off of fossil fuels, and it's time to put my money where my mouth is. So I got myself a used Nissan Leaf and felt very good, very righteous and virtuous. Here I am now, like I'm on the side of the angels now, like I'm saving the planet. But then I started thinking about, I do a lot of reporting on sort of, materials, like the raw materials that make our lives possible. Where does all this stuff come from? And I started wondering that about this car. It's battery that's full of nickel and lithium and cobalt, and the motor that's full of rare earths, and the copper that's in the wire. How do we get all that stuff? So I started looking into it, and to my horror, found that, in fact, this in the name of saving the planet, of helping the planet, my car was actually really doing serious damage to the planet and people on it. To get the materials that go into my car, rainforests are being cut to the ground in Indonesia, children are being put to work in mines, warlords are getting rich, on and on. So that was the genesis of the book.
Right. And then, I mean, what I love about it is, I've read about, lithium salt pans and what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've not been there. I've not been to any of where people recycle stuff. So can we go through that journey you went on? And I think also the thing that's becoming more and more pertinent is that sort of, in a sense, the history since World War II of who gets materials, who digs them up, who refines them, how that has changed. I would say after, in the sort of 40s and 50s, the USA and a few European countries, that was what we did. We refined materials, we made stuff. That has really changed. So the fascinating story you tell about Japan and China and what happened between them is about rare earths and about critical minerals. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, it's really an amazing story. I mean, so basically, as you say, in a nutshell, 100 years ago, even 70, 80 years ago, the United States, right next door to me in Canada, provided most of the world's metals, of these so-called critical metals that we're
Yeah.
talking about. You know, nickel, lithium, copper, cobalt, rare earths. The U.S. produced the lion's share of all of them, and also did the refining for them, right? Because it's not
Right.
enough to just dig this stuff out of the ground. You also have to process it into metals that you can use. But basically, starting in around the 80s, Americans, got really tired. Like mining is very dirty, right? It's an
Yeah.
incredibly polluting and a very, destructive industry. And the environmental movement got into gear, and the Environmental Protection Agency got started. And Americans basically said, like, we don't want this stuff in our backyard. It's let's just move it somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? So all over the world, but more than anywhere else in China, they said, "Great, we'll do it."
Yeah.
We want the money. So as a result, most of these metals are now dug up in all over the world, but where they're but almost all of their supply chains at some point run through China. Every
Yeah.
single metal that we're talking about, the supply chain is really dominated by China, from the mining to the production to the actual manufacture of the actual machines that we're using, the actual car batteries and solar panels and wind turbines. Almost all of that happens in China. And this is another really big downside to the whole energy transition. In addition to all the environmental damage, in addition to all the human suffering that it's causing, we've handed China this enormous geopolitical leverage
Yeah.
that they can use at any time. And, that what you mentioned, this business between China and Japan, it's already happened. So China and Japan got into a kind of a diplomatic scuffle in 2010. China shut off the supply of what are called rare earth metals. These are a bunch of obscure metals that are absolutely critical for electronics manufacturing. Japan, panicked. Like the whole world was set on edge because they suddenly realized that China really had us by the throat.
Yeah.
So, and that's still where we are. People are, in the West, Western Europe, and the United States. They're working very hard to set up supply chains that aren't so dependent on China. But man, we've got a long ways to go.
Yeah. I mean, what we've just had literally announced in the last couple of days in Europe is a enormous increase on tariffs of Chinese built electric cars coming into
Mhm.
Europe, and the whole it just kind of I've always said, actually, right from when I first drove an electric car in 2009, this is disruptive technology. In a way, it is like smartphones. It messes up. There was loads of really good, stable, long-term industries that existed before smartphones arrived.
Mhm.
Fax machines, copper wires, telephones, all that, telephone exchanges. That's all gone. And in the same similar way, I think electric cars mess stuff up because they operate in a different way, and they're not. I've always said they're not the answer. They're not going to make the world perfect. They're still cars, and they require a lot of stuff in them. But the
Exactly.
what I've learned more recently is the kind of international or the geopolitical aspects of that, of how, because of decisions made by an autocratic government in China 20 years ago to say, well, we can't compete with Mercedes-Benz making petrol cars, let's make electric ones. And that's what they've done. And there's no denying it now. They're better than
Yeah,
anything made
they're
in North America
so
or
far,
Europe.
they're so far ahead of us on
Yeah,
really on all the industries that are going to matter the most in the future.
yeah,
Electric cars, renewable energy, they're
yeah,
miles ahead of us in
yeah.
solar manufacturing, wind manufacturing,
Batteries, yeah.
batteries. Yeah, it's
Right.
disturbing.
But then I'm going to read a couple of quotes. So let's move on to because I have actually got the list of rare earths, which I'm not going to read out because I wouldn't know how to pronounce them. And I've heard of maybe 5 of them. I mean, there's some really weird ones, and
Yeah.
they've all got uses. Then but this is probably in microelectronics as well as batteries and electric cars and renewables. This is stuff that we've all got. The equipment you and I are speaking on will have a lot of those materials in them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So rare earths are a really fascinating subcategory of these critical metals.
Yeah,
Sometimes people mix up those terms, but rare earths is a set of 17 specific metals.
right.
Um, that are that that are all used in really niche applications, but are incredibly important.
Yeah.
We just use them in very small amounts, but they make a huge difference. So one of them, europium, for instance, is the thing that makes the color red on your screens, right? Like I can see that
Wow.
red lightning bolt behind you. That's thanks
Yeah.
to europium, tiny bits of
Wow.
europium on my screen, right? And terbium helps make the magnets that make your cell phone vibrate when it gets a call.
Yes.
Um, but probably the one of the most important ones is neodymium, which is the main ingredient in motors, electric motors. So the
Right.
motors that actually drive your car have a lot of are based on neodymium, which is another rare earth. And it's those rare earths that China really like controls, 80-90% of the whole world's
Right.
supply.
So the actual raw material may be anywhere else around the world, but it's basically if you want to get the particular rare earth out of that material, it's got to go to China.
That's
That's where it gets
exactly
refined.
right. That's exactly right.
Right.
So, for instance, here in the United States, we used to produce almost all the rare earths in the world, and almost all of it came from one mine in Southern California.
Wow.
That mine closed down, and we, shipped all the money off to China. So now, because there's so much effort to get those supply chains built back up in the U.S., um, the government has given a lot of subsidies to a company they've reopened that mine, and they're getting a lot of money from the government to help them do that. So they're digging rare earths out of the ground very
Wow.
successfully. But then once they've got them out of the ground, what do they do with them?
Oh
They
my
ship them
God.
all to China
Wow. Wow. That is
because
just
there's nowhere else that has the processing capacity.
yeah.
So
And I mean, the other thing, I guess, when I've certainly talked about this for a long time, in the 80s and 90s, we basically shipped all our heavy industry and manufacturing. Really, we did to China. I mean, and when I say we, I'm talking Europe and North America, United States.
yeah,
But we also shipped all our pollution and waste going into rivers, and our rivers are lovely. Well, they're not actually in this country because we have leaking sewage going to them. But I remember seeing the Ruhr in the Ruhr Valley in Germany when I was 12, and it was a yellow. It looked like mustard. It was a yellow, stinking. It was unimaginably vile, and you could see fumes coming off it, and it would occasionally catch fire. I mean, it was off the scale levels of pollution. You go there now, it's crystal clear. It's beautiful blue water going through all these old industrial towns that are no longer industrial because they've, but where I can imagine you could find a river in China now, which is of a similar level of pollution. I mean,
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, we just figured, let them deal with all the costs, and we'll just buy the stuff from them, and then we can have the
yeah.
best of both worlds.
But I mean, that
But
curse of, that I remember reading about this many years ago, the curse of oil, what oil does to a nation state, if they find oil, and there's examples of this all over the world, then the government can survive without taxing the people, which in turn means they don't need to represent the people. They can just represent the oil companies. And anyone
yeah,
who counters that, you just kill them. I mean, that's what it's a really corrupting influence. And that there's very legitimate arguments about the oil industry's behavior around the world, and their history is not exactly benign. But when you then think of mineral extraction, what one would hope is that we've learnt from that and we would do it differently. And I think there's some efforts to do that, but I can't argue with you. Your reporting on what's happening in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is so appalling and has been so appalling. I mean, I don't know if it's got any better. There's some reports I've read where it's kind of improved a tiny bit, but it still sounds
yeah.
pretty
My
grim.
sense is that it's improved a bit,
Yeah,
but the basic issues are still the same. I mean, there's still
yeah,
forced labor there. There's still children working in those
yeah,
mines. And even under the best of circumstances, like it's really hard, grueling work, and in a lot of places it's done without protective equipment, without with no protections for the miners and so on. But I really I want to say too, I'm actually just writing about this for my newsletter that I'm kicking out in sort of in conjunction with the book. It's also called Power
right,
Metal. We've heard it like the child miners in Congo have gotten a lot of attention, which they should.
Yeah.
It's not the only place where you have child labor in the supply chain of renewable energy. Not at all.
Right.
Also, there are lithium mines in Zimbabwe using kids. There's there in Bolivia. Bolivia supplies most of the world's silver, and silver is a component in solar panels. There's kids working in those mines too, in the
Right.
nickel mines in Indonesia. So it's, there's at least half a dozen other places around the world that they get much less attention, but I think just as
Excuse me.
bad.
Yeah. I mean, that's just so depressing, because I think if I've always quite enjoyed being critical of the oil industry ever since I understood more about what they do, but I haven't really come across a lot of accusations of child labour in the wider oil industry. I
Got to
mean,
give them
there's
that.
certainly,
Got to give them
you know,
that.
yeah, we've got to give them that much. But I mean, the fact that, what is it? So it's 70% of the world's cobalt is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which should mean if we lived in a perfect world, that should mean finally they've got an income and they can improve the lives of the people in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they don't have to. That's what should be happening, and I get the feeling that is definitely not what's happening.
It's really not. I mean, it's, they supply this, like you said, 70% of the world's cobalt. They're also a huge supplier of copper, which is
Yeah,
another critical metal for this era. But it's still one of the poorest countries on earth. I mean,
yeah,
most of the people there, the majority of the people there are living on less than $2 a day.
yeah,
And the wealth is, it's a tiny layer of local elites that are profiting, and then overseas companies, right? Again, Chinese companies
yeah.
own a lot of these mines or own parts of these mines. It's Chinese middlemen that buy the cobalt, raw cobalt, from the small scale artisanal miners, and then they
Right.
sell it to Chinese exporters who take it over to China to be refined. It's
Yeah,
not only China, but China really dominates that place, and yeah, very little of the money is actually staying in Congo.
yeah. And then, I mean, the stuff you did about lithium, because that was the kind of area I was haziest about. I kind of knew that the Atacama Desert was an enormous supply of lithium. And in fact, since I read that chapter, there's been a report about an enormous lithium deposit in the United States. I can't remember. Have you heard about that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. They
But I
just
mean,
so they've yeah. The thing about lithium is there's quite a lot of it in a lot of places. I mean, like you said, they just discovered what they think is a gargantuan amount of lithium in Arkansas.
all
There's a
right,
huge lithium mine that's just about to open up in Nevada. Two of them actually. They just approved one, and there's another one at a place called Thacker Pass that's going to come online pretty soon. The problem is, like, it's one thing to find these things like this discovery in Arkansas. Yeah, there's probably a lot of lithium down there under the ground somewhere, but can you get it out profitably? Can
yeah,
you, is it like, is the ore rich enough? Is it close enough to transportation networks, to power, to infrastructure? Is the price high enough?
yeah,
So just because they've found a whole bunch of lithium somewhere doesn't necessarily mean they're going to start producing that lithium.
yeah. And I mean, the mining industry is the whole. It's enormous, and it affects places all over the world. I mean, I'm familiar with some of the practices in Australia, as I'm married to an
Mm.
Australian, but I've been to British Columbia a few times recently, and I know you've got a couple of mines there knocking about, and in Canada in general, there's a lot of
Lots of lots of
metals
mine.
extraction.
Yeah.
But I mean, that what is again, that is all presumably exported. If someone digs up copper in, I don't know, in northern Canada, it's put on a train, goes to a ship, and probably goes to China.
Most of it. I think most of it.
Right.
I don't actually don't quote me on what's the Canada figures, but definitely a lot of it. We do have there's some refining here in Canada, but not a lot. It's not a huge
Right.
thing. Again, because yeah, I mean it's just part of that offshoring of heavy industry, right? I mean,
Yeah.
metal processing, you need big, gigantic blast furnaces that use a lot of energy and belch out a lot of pollution. It's not a popular thing. Nobody
Yes.
wants that in their backyard,
Yeah. But I mean, it does. It is that kind of, in a sense, there's a similarity to the metals that we all rely on, we buy, we use, we live with. and not knowing anything about where they come from is in a similar way to, I always think that, the argument about vegetarians or vegans and meat eaters. If a meat eater saw a cow going into a room and being shot in the head and cut up, they'd be a vegan pretty quickly.
Yeah.
A lot of people would,
Yeah,
and
no, I
it's
totally agree. I totally agree. I mean,
yeah,
most of us have no idea how our food gets to the supermarket.
yeah,
We just show up and there it is, nice shrink wrapped bits of meat and,
yeah,
beautiful tomatoes and whatnot. And exactly, it's the same
yeah,
with all of our manufactured products, really.
yeah. But the other one I definitely didn't know is that lithium is just. These are all from my notes. Right, as I was reading, I went, I didn't know that lithium may be the oldest metal in the universe. Because I always
Isn't
think
that
of sort of
crazy?
high. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea about that either. But yeah,
Huh.
they believe it was created in the Big Bang. It was one of like
Wow.
three or four elements that were created literally at the beginning of the universe.
Wow.
Very
So
strange.
lithium. It's
Don't
just
ask me how scientists figured that
no,
out. That I have
no.
no idea.
It's quite a good one though. I like that. But then
Yeah.
what? So I've written down molycorp minerals. So
Mm.
they're rare earth mining in Nevada.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But then the one which was the most depressing, which I kind of had some understanding of, is the kind of the valuable metals that people will essentially kill for. So killing for copper. The copper.
Yeah.
That whole. Can you do a brief synopsis of that chapter, because that was devastating? Because I mean, most people who are listening will not know about this, but
Yeah.
that
That one
value.
really
Yeah.
blew my mind too. I had no
Yeah.
idea until I started looking into it. But the nutshell is hundreds of people are dying and being killed in trying to get copper all over the world, and especially in South Africa, where you have literal gangs of people shooting, in all out
Yeah.
warfare, attacking each other over copper. Basically, why? Because thanks to the what I call the electro digital age, right? This era
Yeah.
of renewable energy and digital electronics. We need way more copper than we've ever needed before, more than in all of human history. Demand for copper is going through the roof. That means the price of copper is going through the roof. That means there's a spike in copper theft, right?
Right.
People stealing, copper wire, and wherever you can find copper, they're stealing it. And this is happening on such a huge scale in South Africa. Copper thieves are causing regular blackouts. They're bringing trains to a standstill.
Mm.
Hospitals have to be shut down because basically all their electrical wiring gets stripped out and
Wow.
stolen on a regular basis. And it's become such a big business that there are criminal gangs involved within it who are killing security guards that try to stop them, killing rival gangsters that try to get in their way, and also hundreds and hundreds of people in the United States, probably in the United Kingdom too, die every year because they go and try to steal some live electric
Yeah.
cable. So
No,
it's incredible. I mean, the body count is got to
it's
be in the
shocking.
hundreds
Yeah.
of people every year.
So I
Um,
knew it had happened here. I mean, particularly on the railways. That's where
yeah,
I've not heard about it recently, but certainly in the last 10 years, you would hear of trains having to be cancelled because a gang has stripped all the copper wires out of that run all the communication systems that the railways rely on, and that's definitely
exactly.
happened here. Um, but that is, yeah. I mean, there's nothing, there's not really anything you can do about it. I mean, it is such a, those things are it just seems to be human nature that if there's an opportunity to really stuff things up and try and make a quick buck, someone's going to do it.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. Which
It's
is
true. Well,
that was
they've
a
tried, there are ways they've tried to crack down on it here in the States by things like, because a lot of the stuff gets sold to recycling yards who then
yeah,
sell it on to refiners. So, there are schemes to like, force recycling yards to, to collect ID from people and,
yeah,
these sort of measures to try to make sure that it's not stolen. But you can't really stop it. I mean, there's
no,
so much copper lying around all over the place, and it's so easy to steal, right? You can't put
yeah,
security guards on every, 10 yards of electric
yes, of
cable,
cable,
every
yeah,
manhole cover, or every air conditioner. So yeah,
yeah.
that's one we're kind of stuck with, I
Because
think.
I mean, it was one of the things that I did a TV show in this country, and we made it for the United States. It was called Scrap Heap Challenge in this country, and Junkyard Wars in the USA, which was a kind of team challenge show. This will make sense in a moment. A team challenge show where two teams had to build a machine out of trash on a scrapyard,
Hmm,
or a scrap
great
heap or
idea.
whatever. And it was, a very successful show. It ran for 10 years, and but one of the side issues that was nothing to do with the actual show was our knowledge of the price of scrap, because we would, in the first few series we did each year, we would build a wall of busted cars, you know, 10 meters high. So we had a backdrop so that we hid the rest of the scrapyard, which was still a working yard with cranes and crushing machines and all that. So we could fence that off because there were so many cars. It was easy. And you just get one of those big cranes that lifts about, just like a kid building a wall of blocks. And then, like the third or fourth year, so early 2000s, we couldn't get any cars. They were too expensive. They were all being crushed and sent to China as fast as it was possible to do. So there were
No
shiploads
kidding.
of crushed European cars going to China. And
Wow.
in those few years, even before that happened, I remember driving near where I live, which is in a rural area. It's very not very heavily populated. You would just see a car like on the corner of the lane, maybe with a flat tire. It's just left there because where can you take it? It's just worth nothing. It was just get rid of it. So people would drive it out to the country, leave it, get in another car and drive home. I don't know. That was quite a common sight. After this happened, you'd never see a car lying around. They were too valuable. But that
Amazing.
the kind of reprocessing of that material. I mean, that's what I want to. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the point where we've been looking at like extracting raw materials and refining them and all those issues. But actually, there's such a big part of basically half your book is about the other half of that, which is we've got all these materials we've already dug up. We really shouldn't leave them lying around. I mean, that was a good example of that. But I just wanted to go just before. I'm not a professional. If you were interviewing someone, you'd do this much better than I am. I feel very bad. But I
Put
just
you
want to get to Norlisk nickel, the Russian stuff, because I'd never thought
Yeah.
about that. I didn't even know that existed. That is the
Yes.
most extraordinary story. Can you please give us the thumbnail of nickel in
Sure.
Russia?
So in a nutshell, so nickel again is a crucial ingredient for
Yeah,
batteries in our electric cars and our phones, all our digital gadgets. And the world's top supplier, or until very recently, the world's top supplier of the high grade nickel that's best for batteries was Russia. In
yeah,
particular, this one specific company, Norilsk Nickel, that's owned by a billionaire oligarch, a buddy of Vladimir Putin's. And what the amazing thing to me was, so when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, immediately the West, responded with all these economic sanctions. Oh, we're cutting off, imports of Russian commodities, this, that, the other. They did not cut off Russian nickel. This nickel
right.
was so important that we just very quietly
Carried on.
increased, in fact, our imports of it that
Wow.
year. Yeah. That's finally changed just a few months ago. The US finally did sanction Russian nickel, but for a good 2 years there, we were
Yeah,
just quietly going ahead and paying out billions of dollars
yeah.
to this Russian oligarch. So in a very real way, the electric car revolution helped to fund the invasion of the Ukraine.
That is so depressing. That's
Yes.
That is very, very depressing. But I just think it is worth mentioning because it's and also, I mean, yes, it was also a brilliant example of offshoring our pollution and the impacts that we have on. Because there was this incredible story of the fuel tanks collapsing in 2020. Was that was them,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
that was also
Which is
Norilsk. Yeah. So that, I
yeah,
mean, the Russian nickel industry actually has been there for it's been around for quite a long time.
yeah,
So that's less of one that we handed to them, but yeah, they've had this huge nickel and other and copper industry up in the north and sort of Siberia for decades, and it's just devastated that area. It's made it one
right.
of the most polluted on Earth. In fact, the sulfur dioxide, this one particular toxin that comes out of their smokestacks, the amount that they're producing was more than all the rest of the sulfur dioxide produced in the rest of the world put together.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. That's
Yeah.
just Yeah, and I mean, and we all know how obsessively tree-hugging vegan and environmentalist the Russian government are.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. So,
yeah. But the other one, which is interesting that you mention him, because I've interviewed him on the Fully Charged Show podcast, is Gerard Barron, who's the
oh yeah,
CEO of the metals company. So this is, and we also work with the amazing woman, Dr. Helen Chersky, who is a proper marine scientist who studies the effects that we're having on the oceans, who's who's not that keen on deep sea mining. I think it's fair to say, but that is so
very
extraordinary
hard.
that
It's hard to find any real scientists that are keen on deep sea mining.
yeah,
I looked.
yeah,
I looked. I couldn't really find any.
right, because it is such a. I mean, I actually have one of the nodules here. He sent me a nodule, so I
Nice.
have one
I
of the
got one
nodules.
as well. Yeah,
You
a
go.
good souvenir.
Yeah,
He
we've
gave
all got our.
Mark
We
gave
should have
you
a.
one too.
We should get together everyone who's been given a nodule, so we're in the nodule club.
Right, or maybe we could put them all together and sell them.
But I mean, I understand why they're. Can you describe why it could possibly be worth sending a machine down to 4 miles deep in the ocean to dig up nodules? I mean, they are extraordinary things.
Sure. They really are. So their nodules are these little. They're just rocks, basically. They're like the size of your fist. They're these sort of black, sort of potato shaped rocks that just happen to be packed with all kinds of critical metals that we need. There's copper, cobalt, nickel, and a couple of other manganese. So it's this incredible resource, and there are literally billions of them down there. So it is an enormous potential source of these metals that we really do need. So what Gerard Barron and several other companies and national governments want to do is mine them, basically strip mine the ocean floor to bring these
Yeah,
nodules, to get these nodules and bring them up to the surface. So obviously there's a lot of potential money to be made, but my God, the risk that we pose, the damage that could be done to the world's oceans is just
yeah,
is incalculable.
yeah,
And not forgetting that the oceans are already terribly stressed by climate change, by pollution, by overfishing. So to add on the extra stress of literally tearing up the ocean floor, I mean, basically like I said, pretty much any scientist that's looked at it says at best we really need to wait and do more research, and at
yeah,
worst we should never ever do this.
yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of scientists have signed a petition saying we shouldn't do this. Even some of the companies that are in the business of needing these
Right.
materials have
Have
said
said
we will
no.
not buy
Right.
ocean materials. Nonetheless, uh, the metals company, which is Gerard Barron's company, is still pushing really hard to get
Right.
permission to start as soon as next year.
Right.
So
I mean, it
we
can
may,
sort of understand it. His argument, just to give him his due, is that in order to get the equivalent amount of metals as they can extract, where I mean, his argument is there's no waste in the nodule. You would use every single bit of it because it's just made of all those critical elements. But and in order to get those, you'd have to dig away half a mountain in Malaysia or a huge pit in Siberia or a massive quarry in whatever, huge amount
right.
of disruption to get the same amount of metal. And this is, I mean, that his argument was, I mean, his argument, the one thing that I always remember him saying is by 2050, we've got to stop digging shit up, which was, very, very Australian terminology,
Simply
but I'm
put,
used to
yeah,
that. But I mean, I think that is well, in a sense, that leads us on to the next step. So I've been followed very closely the work of JB Straubel of Redwood Materials, of the
mhm,
notion that you can, and we definitely should, recycle everything that we use, and we should use it again. That's pretty obvious. And it's the kind of biggest argument about fossil fuels, because I've never seen a fluid ounce of recycled diesel that's already been
yeah,
used. That's a tall ask, I think, to do that. But I mean, that I think basically it's been incredibly sobering reading your book, because those things are possible, and Redwood Materials are operating, and they are recycling, and they are producing materials that can be used again. But it's incredibly hard work and very energy demanding. It
yeah.
uses a lot of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was really it was disappointing to me too to find out that, recycling, which is everybody's favorite solution,
Yeah,
I mean, it helps. Don't get me wrong. It's better than digging up virgin materials, but
yeah,
it's also very energy intensive. It's very dirty, very polluting, and it's often done on the backs of the poorest people in the world.
yeah, yeah,
So there's a lot to be cleaned up in the whole recycling industry, and even in the best case, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all our problems. It'll help. It's part of the
yeah,
solution, but recycling comes with its own really serious costs, and we have
yeah.
to recognize that.
And I mean, it is the kind of the e-waste stories from Nigeria. I mean, I did know that that was happening, but not to the detail that you went into. But I mean, that is, and that was also an image I remember from a documentary I saw about the early stages of redwood materials and Straubel. Was these huge containers that were, delivered by big forklift trucks, massive sort of boxes full of flip phones and
Mhm.
old fashioned cell phones. I mean, they're not that old, but in terms of
But they
technology,
just people
and
just throw them out like
they've all
that.
been thrown, and it wasn't 100 or 200; it was millions of them. And of course, there were millions of them, and of course, they do contain valuable materials, but they've got to be broken up. And the stuff, the way you described the way that there's people busting up plastic phones and ripping out the, the cards and
The
trying to get
circuit board.
just incredible. But I think it's the amount of it that is if you bust up one little phone in your front room, you've got some bits of plastic and a I've forgotten the name for the little green thing with all the bits on it. What's that called?
Circuit board, the printed
Yeah, the
circuit
circuit
board.
board. Sorry, that's what I was searching for that term. But it's not a big deal. But if you have 2 million of those in a pile, that's a big.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um,
I mean,
and
this is the
that sounds
story
like
with
quite a big industry in Nigeria. I mean, that employs a lot of people working in
it employs a lot of
Greece.
people, and it's not just Nigeria. I mean, you can
Right,
find, e-waste recyclers like that all over the developing world,
right.
all over the place. Because there's little the amount of value inside of each one of our gadgets, each phone or laptop or
Tiny.
whatever,
Yeah,
it's small. It's only, it's 10, 20, 50 cents. And nobody in the Western world is going to pay you to do that. But if you're living in a country where the average wage is $2 a day, if you
yeah.
can make 50 cents off of, an hour's work,
Stripping
that's
out
great.
phones. Yeah. The one tiny light that we have seen in this otherwise quite dark world is a machine that Apple have developed specifically for their phones. So
Yeah.
and when they gave us the stats for that, so we did a program about it, and it's got a name and I can't
Oh, yeah.
remember. We've done an episode about it, and it's a machine that literally tears the phone to bits, punches out the circuit boards, then breaks down and separates each individual part into again vast boxes of like 12 million lenses from iPhone cameras. It's just like when you see it, you just go, I can't believe it. But obviously
Yeah.
they've all got a value, and they know what's gone into it. They've only do iPhones. They know what's gone into it, and they're already using an enormous amount of that material in their new iPhones, which is that's their kind of marketing shtick. But
Yeah.
that we need to do that with everything. I mean, they're talking about 1.4 billion iPhones. That's the kind of numbers. So it's tons of gold and tons of nickel, and it's extraordinary.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah,
even though it's expensive and it's hard to do, but it's much easier than getting that gold
out
out
of
of
mine.
rock,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
I mean, we can be doing a lot better. Well, one of the things we need is a lot more research and development into ways to recycle more
to
effectively,
recycle it.
more efficiently,
Yeah.
all the rest of it.
And that's another thing is the transportation, which I must admit I'd never even considered. That if you've got 100,000 phones here and you send them to anywhere, you're shipping them. That's weight and it's got mass and it's got to be
That
moved.
ship burning up diesel to
Yeah,
transport them back and forth. Yeah, and
yeah.
the thing that blew my mind the most was how these people, these entrepreneurs in places like Nigeria are making money selling our own trash back to us.
Back. Yeah,
We send them, a container loads of old cell phones. They smash them apart, separate out all the
yeah,
circuit boards, and then they sell the circuit boards right back to us.
yeah. No, it is extraordinary that. Yeah. And it is so yeah, it was one of your statistics around that. 1 in 6 dead cell phones are recycled, which means every landfill site that you ever looked at, there's hundreds of thousands
Full
of
of,
bits of electronic. Yeah,
yeah.
which is not good. I mean, we've all got it. I've got a special shelf in my cupboard, which is old, now like probably 25, 30-year-old laptops and phones and things. And I have recycled them, to be fair to myself. Or no, I have taken them to a place where they are recycled, I hope. The copper, that one, there was a description of, I think that was in Nigeria, of people burning off
Yeah.
the coating on copper wire at night so that nobody complained about the smell because they were asleep. It was just like, oh my God, that's just,
It's horrifying. Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that's another one of the big downsides, right? Is there's tons of burning, right? These
yeah,
these these scrappers in Nigeria and other places, yeah, they just burn all this wire to get the plastic or the rubber off of it, and
yeah,
it creates incredibly toxic smoke. And of course, nobody's got any kind of protective masks. Nobody's doing any sort of anything to mitigate all the the pollution that this creates.
yeah, yeah. It is. I mean, because it's also that thing where, in a sense, like in Democratic Republic of Congo, there are actual legitimate mines that employ people in safe conditions with big diggers and big trucks, and they are extracting huge amounts of material in what we would accept would be a traditional mining environment. And then around that, there is the sort of the artisanal mining, and in a similar way, there's kind of proper big companies that are learning and starting to develop technologies to recycle car batteries because there's a lot of value in them.
Yeah.
But one of the things we saw last year was disposable vape batteries that had been stripped
Mhm.
out of tens of thousands, and it wasn't like it was tens of thousands of tiny. They're actually rechargeable batteries that look recognizably like batteries that people literally throw away. There's
Huh.
always a sort of extra bit that you kind of haven't thought about, really.
Right, right. Yeah. And the
I mean,
batteries are
that's
just
what
crazy. Like when you stop and think about how many batteries are in so many things, right? We always think about
yeah,
phones and laptops, but it's also like any power tool that you have, if
yeah,
you've got a cordless drill or a cordless screwdriver, or a weed whacker, like there's so many devices in our world
yeah,
that have the same battery. They're all lithium ion batteries, or they're almost all
yeah.
lithium ion batteries. E-bikes and vapes. I hadn't really thought about vapes, but you're
No,
right.
I
Those are
never had before I saw this. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it was an artistic project that was using e-waste to build
ah,
it was an artist that was doing it. Um, uh, uh, that's so. The other one is then you sort of towards the end of your book, you talk about how and I think I'm sure I'm older than you, but we both of an age where we would remember that going into a store, a grocery store, or even a supermarket, and not seeing the same level of single use plastics that we do now
mhm,
that has just
mhm.
become normal. When that's happened in
Yeah.
our lifetime. When I was a kid, milk came in a glass bottle that you washed out and gave
Mhm,
back to the man that brought the milk. That
mhm.
was, I would think, 95% of milk consumed in the UK, that was where it came from. It was never in a plastic. But also that stuff was repaired. So my mother was of the wartime generation where everything was used again and repaired and looked after, and everything was patched and mended. Uh, and I just love this. In 1966, according to research, 200,000 Americans worked as home appliance repairers, and by 2023, that had dropped to about 40,000 in the whole of the United States.
Yeah.
Because you don't mend stuff, you go, oh, the tumble dryer's broken. Let's get another one, which
Yeah.
is
Let's just
mind-boggling.
chuck it and get a new one.
Yeah, and it's cheaper to
Yeah.
get a new one.
I mean, it's usually cheaper to get a new one, which is crazy. It
Yeah,
is
yeah,
absolutely crazy. And and it's only cheaper because we don't really factor in the real costs
yeah,
of manufacturing a new one, right? The fact that we can get these things cheap because again, they're usually made in China, you
yeah,
know, but that doesn't take into account all the damage that was done by getting the raw materials for them and the product, all the
yeah,
stuff we've been talking about. The good news is there is a real push, what's called the right to repair movement. There's a
Yes.
lot of people working hard to to reverse that and to make things, to force manufacturers to make their products easier to repair. Because a
Yeah.
lot of one part of the reason that we don't fix stuff anymore is companies that make it deliberately make them hard to repair,
Right.
especially electronics. They do not supply the manuals that you need to know how to fix the thing. They don't provide, you can't buy spare parts for them. Sometimes you can't even you need special tools, like to open the laptop, the MacBook that I'm talking to
Yeah.
you on. You can't use a regular screwdriver. You need a
No.
special star-shaped
So
screwdriver,
yes.
right? It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So, but there's actually the European Union, I know, just passed has passed a couple of laws just in the last year or two, um, to basically to force, like I said, to force corporations to make their products easier to repair.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's going to make a difference, because it makes no sense whatsoever.
And your final chapter, the road forward and how to travel it, it really resonated with me because it's what we say on the show all the time about how we continue. And I think you mentioned, I mean, I'm afraid I've become a Utrecht fan, but I think you mentioned Utrecht as being
Yeah,
a sort of an example of that. And we've spent a couple of days filming there. Well, we've been there a few times. And I mean, it is a remarkable achievement. And I think the Dutch are rightly proud of it. But I mean, would you like to explain a bit of your take on it? Because that's,
yeah, it. Uh, Yeah, well, I went to my introduction was Amsterdam, which is similar. Like
right.
I flew into Amsterdam and I took the train into the middle of the city, and you come out in the main train station in the middle of Amsterdam. And the first thing you walk by is this gigantic parking lot that's nothing but bicycles,
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of bicycles. I had never seen anything like it. And I'm a
Yeah.
biking guy. I mean, I've been, a big biker for decades here in
Yeah.
North America. Never, wow, it completely blew my mind. And then you go
Yeah.
walking around town, and there are bicycles everywhere, bicycles
Yeah.
getting everyone to and fro. And, old people, young people, out of shape people, in shape people, people in suits on their way to business meeting. It's just become so normalized. It's really incredible. It's really inspiring. And that's not an accident, right? It's not because the
Yeah.
Dutch just happen to love bicycles. No, in the 70s, they were like the rest of us, right? There were very few bikes and lots of cars. But this movement got started by this man whose daughter was killed by a motorist,
That's right.
and he
Yeah.
looked around and he said, he started an organization called No More Child Murders,
Right.
basically saying, let's make our streets safer for people again. And it really helped start this whole movement to just not to get rid of cars, but to make the streets more accessible, safer for
Yeah.
pedestrians and for bicycles. And 40 years later, they're reaping these incredible benefits,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
like something like half of all the trips that are taken in cities like Utrecht or Amsterdam are now by bicycle.
Yeah.
Whereas here in the United States, it's like 5% tops.
Yes.
And as a
Yeah.
result, the cities are much safer, they're cleaner, they're
Yeah.
quieter, and they're just way more pleasant, right? It's much nicer to just walk around streets where there
Yeah.
aren't cars zooming by you all the time.
There's a great, when we were there last time, which was a few years ago, there was a great, we were on a street where there was a bike path. There were lots of cafes with seats outside, trees. There was a bike path and a tram line. No car, there was no cars at all. And then we suddenly saw this photograph that was on display, big black and white photograph of that street in 1972. And it looked like any street in any city now, with cars jammed in, like loads of cars, no
Really?
trees, no people. You couldn't see any people. And that's what it was like. So it did show, we did used to be like that, but we've moved on. And it was such a delight. We were just walking along the street, and it was, you just go, why can't we all? But I mean, it is that thing where that's, in a sense, goes beyond the digital electrical age of electric cars. It is, the car has come to dominate our cities,
Yes,
particularly. I mean, I think North America set the bar. Let's
for
build
sure.
huge cities with wide streets and have thousands of cars,
Yeah.
and they're very much built around all the suburban expansion. Really, was built
Yeah, it
around the
was all
car.
built for cars and not for people. And
Yeah, that's a hard
yeah,
one to battle because, I mean, Utrecht, the middle of Utrecht, I think was probably built 1,000 years ago. So some old streets that are very narrow. Same as in this country, we've got a lot of that. But and the last bit that I really hadn't thought about, even though we've talked about it a lot. My wife went to China to train to be an acrobat in 1984, and there's
really.
amazing pictures of her. She's an Australian, and so there's this big lanky white woman in a street in China, surrounded by 250,000 Chinese children, all staring at this weird figure. So very much back then, and everyone was on bikes. All the photographs she's got is just bicycles. I don't think that she's got a picture of any cars. It's buses, trucks, and bicycles. And
Yeah,
obviously that they've gone completely the other way. They were really cool with bicycles. Now
yeah,
it's car city.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate. It really
Yes.
is.
Um.
But it's not too late. I mean, with the moral that I take away from all this is that there's nothing permanent about
Yeah.
the way we have our cities set up. We've set up our cities around cars, deliberately and consciously, and we can unmake those decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, places like Los Angeles or Phoenix or Houston, I don't know, it might be too late for them,
Yeah.
but certainly, cities like London, Paris, even where I live in Vancouver,
Yeah.
we can and we are in fact doing a lot to really bring city streets, give the streets back to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is doable, and it is
Yeah.
being done in a lot of places.
And I mean, I suppose the flip side of that is if we did do things like that, as they do in Utrecht. Don't want to give Utrecht too much, but they do amazing car sharing schemes. So there's less cars, and I've seen that in a
Yeah,
couple of cities. Berlin is another place where it's very successful car sharing, which
yeah,
ends up the people who live in the middle of the city. They don't want to own a car. It's a pain in the ass, So
yeah.
you share them, and therefore you
Exactly.
have less
Same here
cars.
in Vancouver, where I live. We have this service called Evo, where it's there's just cars, all over the place, and you use an
Right?
app and you find a car, and then you drive the car wherever you need to go, and you just leave it. And it's
Yeah.
great. You
Yeah.
don't have to pay for parking. You don't have to deal with your own garage.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So
Yeah.
much easier than owning your own car.
I mean, it is. I think that's what I hope. I sort of the hope because I definitely went through a mild depression about 3/4 of the way through your book, just because it's like
I'm sure.
you're not buttering it up. You're not saying this is okay. You're saying this is bad. We need to work this out. I mean, I want to encourage people to read it because it arms you with facts, I think, which are very useful. So when you hear stupid nonsense about materials and electric cars and recycling, you actually need to know. I mean, it is that difficult thing we've all got to do is understand what's really going on rather than what we're occasionally told by.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you saying that, but I hope it didn't leave you too depressed by the end, because really what I
No.
try to do in the second half of the book is point us to solutions. There are things we can do that'll
Yeah.
make things better, and a lot of those things are already starting to happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that's what I wanted to end on. It was by the time I got to the end, I was a little bit more cheered up.
okay, good. That makes me feel better.
No, well, thank you so much, Vince. I mean, I really appreciated reading it. I'm really glad that I got the chance to see it. So it comes out. I think this is probably going to go out after your book comes out, but it comes out in early November. Is that when it?
November 19th.
November 19th. Oh, hopefully we'll be. This will certainly be close to that, which would be great.
Great.
And is it published all over the? I mean, will people in the UK be able to get it?
Yep, there's a British edition that's coming out, and
Right.
for folks listening anywhere else, you can order it from Amazon. You can
Yeah.
get it through anywhere books are sold, as they say.
Very good. Brilliant stuff. Oh well, all straight to you, and hopefully we might see you in Vancouver next year with a bit of luck. I think we're
If
back
you're
there doing a
here,
show.
yeah, give
Yeah,
me a shout. Absolutely.
we'll do.
Absolutely.
I'll do. All right. Thank you so much, and you take care.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Really hope you enjoyed that. Not going to waffle on. Please do join us again next week. We've got another amazing guest, another amazing episode. Do tell your friends about it. And please have a lovely week. And we will see you all soon. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening/watching.